So this is resuming the lecture of polish, and I think it's kind of pretty relevant because the stuff I'm working on right now at work, although I can't go into specifics, I am polishing. So I'm in this phase where we're taking our existing feature set and iterating and iterating and iterating and making them look better and better and play better and better. So for me, this never stopped happening. Like, polish is a constant battle between trying to make something look as good as you can in the time remaining that you have left, because there's always more stuff for you to do, and there's not enough time to do all those things. At work, it's kind of nice because they'll try to incorporate time for polish for us, but sometimes it doesn't work out. You'll say that you need 4 days to do a task and you only need a couple days to polish it. Ends up that it takes you a week to do the task. Now you're over by a day and you have no time to polish it. So they'll have to schedule that in later again to make it better, which we've done. We've rebooted several times some of our features that we use, so it ends up being like this struggle between making something that you're really proud of versus making something that is usable and will help you ship the game. I entered a Ludum Dare contest this weekend, and I didn't really get to spend a ton of time on it, but I was able to get basic gameplay in, but I was lacking like all kinds of polish. There was almost no time for that. So for me, I appreciate when I have time to do that because it lets me, that's where I feel like I enjoy, that's where game development for me means the most, is putting those personal touches, like taking that feature and thinking about really what would you want to see in a game to make it that much better. Because you've played games and there have been games out there that just look shitty. You know, it can be anything ranging from environments to you see, like, oh, look at all that clipping in Z Fighting, or man, this texturing was really terrible here, to how they handle effects, frame rate, gameplay itself is not balanced sometimes. So I want to talk a little bit about how you can actually polish, because for me it's not always clear what the next thing to fix is. And sometimes it's really obvious, like if you're just flat out missing things like sound effects and music, and you actually only did a first pass on all your art, then it's pretty obvious that you can do another pass on all that stuff. But if it's not obvious, if you've already gone through all that stuff and you're like, man, you're kind of reaching for things, some of the best things you can do is get feedback. Watch other people play your game. Don't say anything, just watch them play, and then see how they react to the things in your game. Polish doesn't always mean making something look prettier. It also means smoothing out all the rough edges so that people that are playing your game will understand it on the first time that they play it without you like standing over their shoulder and explaining how to do things. The hallmark of a good game is that you give the game to someone and they just start playing it and they kind of get what to do right away. They don't get confused, they don't get lost. If you have to explain how to play your game before they start playing it, then you've already failed as far as the gameplay flow. You want to make sure that you give your game a once-over, let other people play your game before you feel like it's done, because you'll find things that people are trying to do that you never even expected. It's really important because you get so used to playing your own game, hopefully you are playing your game a lot when you're iterating, that you kind of like zone out the things that you're like, oh, well, that's temporary, like controls, right? Controls are huge. Like, you're so used to using your own controls that you don't even know when they're confusing anymore, because you know how they work. You have to give them to someone else that had no idea what they're doing to understand where it's failing or falling apart. So we do that a lot. We do focus testing. And internally within Blizzard, we bring people in to play our game constantly. Every week we're getting people from other game teams, Diablo 3, WoW, and StarCraft 2, BattleNet, Hearthstone. All those guys come in and play our game. People that have never played our game before, we sit them down, they play the game, and then we get their feedback at the end, and we combine it all, and we can see the things that are the same between multiple sessions. We can see like, oh, these people said the same thing between these sessions, right? So I think it helps to have more than just your own input. Even within your groups, you guys should be playing your game and giving critical, harsh feedback. You should be your own worst critic for your own game. You should be super critical of your own game as much as you can. Get rid of all that stuff within your own groups first. Right, so that didn't advance this slide. No. Play. Yes. So the actual phase of where do you begin, especially when you're going to be starting working on groups, you're going to be tempted to do polish in a different variety of ways. There's no really one set way to polish your game. The two main ways you can do them are, you can kind of do them as you go. You're making a feature, you've implemented a feature, you prototyped it, and you're like, oh, that's pretty good. Before you move on to your next thing, you can spend some time polishing it. You can be like, well, this feature itself is done, and I feel like I have a good idea of how it's going to work. Well, let me spend a little bit of time making it better. Or you can, as a group, decide, well, we know this thing needs to get worked on later. We know that we don't have time for it right now. There are too many other important things that need to get done. So just leave it as is, and we'll come back to it later if we have time. And it's important to work this out with your group, because if you individually have a different priority about what you're working on versus what your group thinks, you might be required to make an asset that someone else needs or implement a feature that someone else needs, but you can't because you spent time polishing something you thought was really cool. So the easiest way to work around this is to communicate, talk with each other, say, hey, I'd like to spend more time. Hey, I'm working on this thing. I want to make it better. Someone will bring up, well, I still need this other feature, and can you just put that on hold for now while you implement this feature for me so I can keep moving forward? It's really common that for us, we're dependent, as gameplay programmers, we're dependent upon other teams for resources like animations, effects, sounds. We need other teams to do things for us, and we can't just be like, oh shit, we needed this animation. Let me just go ask him and see if he can make this for me real quick, because he's handling requests from like a dozen other people, right? So maybe it's important to spend time polishing something else while he's working on his feature, his list of tasks, and that's the time that you can also spend polishing. This is Planetary Annihilation, I want to say. I think this game is like a Kickstarter game. It's kind of cool. It's in the vein of Supreme Commander. Like, you build your base on this planet, and you can launch attacks on other planets from your planet. So you build these rockets that fly across the space and blow them up. Planetary Annihilation. It's on Steam. I think you can actually get early access to it right now. Pretty cool. So I mentioned that polish is not just making a game look prettier. It's not even just making a game more fun or easier to use. Polishing is also about getting rid of the things that are just not working in your game, or optimizing behavior that you know is wrong. Like, for programmers, this usually amounts to making the performance as close to 60 frames a second as you can, or making it fit within the memory budgets, or within making it run on PS3 or Xbox or whatever platform you're developing for. Cutting is also really key. Maybe there's an area in your level that you just never really got a chance to fully detail out. You're just like, well, crap, I never really got a chance to detail out this thing. It might be worth talking about changing the flow. Maybe you have to cut out some gameplay because you just don't have the time to make that area better. The problem is that now you're getting into, like, cutting parts out of a level is pretty expensive. We fought this all the time in Hunted, where we were over memory budget, the gameplay was too boring in some areas, and we're like, crap, we need to cut out this whole section here. Well, cutting out a section is not as easy as just like select all, delete, and then shift everything. Like, everything is affected by the fact that the level is no longer in the same area. Things like lighting and triggers and gameplay, cinematics are all broken. Your flow is all broken. The way that you load the levels has to be updated. The biggest thing that we fought with whenever we moved levels was all our streaming, or we had this order of levels that we needed to stream them in, and they were all manually configured. That's just how you set them up. You can set them up to be automatic and Unreal, but it never really works right. So everything was manual. So every time we wanted to change some geometry, we had these really, really tight budgets on memory. So if you suddenly added or removed levels too early or too late, then you would blow your memory budget out and you'd start crashing the console, which you'd think something simple like removing a piece of level wouldn't cause that, but every little minor change matters a lot. You do have to make a lot of tough decisions even at the late game. BioShock Infinite used to have a multiplayer component. It got restarted like twice before they figured out what the game was going to be. Their multiplayer component was like a PvP mode, which was silly because like BioShock 2 had a PvP mode and it was really bad. And you don't, like, if your single player campaign is as good as BioShock Infinite is, you didn't need a multiplayer campaign. Think of how many hours they wasted getting multiplayer to work, all the levels they made for multiplayer, all the programmers that they dedicated to making multiplayer work, all the artists that worked on UI or any of the designers that worked on balancing the gameplay, all that work in the trash. You basically just lost everything. That never got released, the multiplayer component. You got DLC that got released, but all that time spent on it. Can you imagine? And it happens. That's what sucks. The problem is that you have to make that.
If the only thing you worked on was the PvP component, like you didn't touch any other part of the game except PvP, and it gets scrapped at the end. Do they even bother putting your name in the credits?
Yeah, they do. They put your name. I had a buddy that was working on the UI for multiplayer. He only worked on multiplayer. He also was working on the split screen UI, and all got cut. He spent like 4 months of his life working on this UI, right? And he's like, well, whatever, it happens. He gets a paycheck because he works for Blind Squirrel Games and he's a contractor. But I mean, they have to put your name on the credits because you actually contributed time to work. Even if everything else got cut, except for just like the title screen, all the people that contributed to the game get your name. But you know, credits are determined in weird ways. Like everyone seems to do them differently. At In Exile, it was literally just an Excel spreadsheet that got sent around with like, hey, what do you want to be called in the credits for the game? And so you put your requested thing that you want to put in. At Blizzard, it's predetermined. If you're on Battle.net, you get your name in every single game that goes out, like just bar none. You could just get listed. So I'm in like WoW, in Mists of Pandaria, Diablo 3, StarCraft 2, Wings of Liberty, and Heart of the Swarm. Even though like the stuff that I worked on was like super minor, it was like build server maintenance and delivery tools, but I'm still in the credits. So does that mean that I contributed equally to all parts of the game? No, but I still got to make a mark on the game, which is cool. So I don't know. Credits are kind of weird because like everyone wants a credit, like everyone wants their name in that thing, but like when it finally gets down to the last part when you're deciding where the credits go, it's like totally just like a half hour of people's time, maybe, right? Like most of the time is not spent gathering names, it's figuring out how they actually go or where they actually show up. Although for Hearthstone, which is cool, if you ever see the credits for Hearthstone, every member on that team got their own personal designed card in that game, like a card that like is in the style of Hearthstone, which is really cool. There's a guy on that team, well, he used to be on the team, he's not anymore. Brian Schwab, he was like huge, really, he's super into working out. He's like a really big guy and super athletic. And his card is, he costs 10 mana, and he's a 10 toughness, 10 attack power card. And it's just like a picture of him looking like He-Man on the card art in cartoon stylized. So sometimes I guess they can do cool stuff. But it sucks because I know that they didn't want to cut it, but they had to. It wasn't at the polish level of the rest of the game. So what that meant is that if they shipped this, and they shipped this subpar multiplayer mode, everyone would be judging the multiplayer mode. And so BioShock wouldn't be getting all these great awards and wouldn't be getting these high scores. It'd be brought down by the quality of the multiplayer, which by itself was probably better than multiplayer in other games, but compared to the single-player experience, it was not up to the same quality level. Even though single-player was like super short, and the combat was kind of subpar. The story was really good. I don't know, people might disagree with me on that, but I thought it was an okay game. I didn't play it for the gameplay though. I played it for the story. Right, and I should mention another thing. I think I mentioned this before. When you get to the GM candidate stage and the beta stage for your game, and you send it off to Sony and Microsoft to see if you can ship your game on their console, they give you back a checklist of things that you either need to fix or that you need to implement to support them. So it's like for Microsoft, it's a lot of like, hey, while you're connecting to Xbox Live, pull out your network cable and then plug it back in. What happens? And does it do these things? While you're saving your game on the 360, pull out your memory card during the middle of the save. Even though there's all these warnings telling you never pull out your memory card in the middle of the save, pull it out. What happens? Put it back in. What happens? So all these checklists that you didn't even think about, that you didn't think you needed in your game, need to get put in. So at this point, you also have to start talking about implementing these things that have no bearing on gameplay usually, which is the sucky part. You spend all this time on the TCRs and TRCs, technical requirement checklists and technical certification requirements. TCRs are for Microsoft and TRCs are for Sony. You spend all this time on them, and it takes like months to get through all this crap. It's like, eject the disk during the middle of loading. What happens? Can you make sure that you show a warning message? Make sure that you can invite your friends from any single point in the game. That's a requirement at Microsoft. You open up the menu and you have to be able to invite your friends. If you have leaderboards, you must show these things. You must be able to sort by your friends, sort by all players, sort by where you are, and all these different features that you have to implement just to support leaderboards. So some people just don't even implement leaderboards in their game, even though it might be useful, because you have to meet the requirements of what Microsoft and Sony tell you. Sony is a lot more lax on the requirements. They're very easy comparatively to Xbox, but it's still something that's a pain in the butt to take care of. Okay. I wonder why. Right. Here's a bug. I found this video of GTA. GTA is like kind of notorious for having all these weird issues. This is what they shipped with, and hundreds of other bugs like this too. It's true. I guarantee you they knew about that bug. I guarantee that they decided that that bug was lower priority than other bugs that they needed to fix. Which is crazy, right? Because like,
Or that it was just funny.
it's funny. Well, they would want to fix it, but because I know that it's in World of Warcraft, for instance, they have thousands and thousands of bugs, which kind of was crazy to me to see in person, because I played WoW for a really long time, and I felt like I never really saw any serious bugs. But they have thousands of bugs, and their bugs are so coming in at such a high rate that every so often they declare what's called bug bankruptcy. So they'll just wipe all the bugs from the database. Doesn't matter whether it's the most critical bug to fix or the lowest priority bug, they just wipe them all. And then they start from scratch because they can't do anything. Like there's no way to reasonably prioritize that many bugs. By declaring bug bankruptcy, they basically figure that the most prominent bugs, the most bugs that you see that are most common, will sort up to the top and come in first, and they can fix those, right? But you can't fix them all. There's no way, and so you end up with lots of bugs. You end up with bugs that you make here as well. For us, it's a never-ending battle of also prioritizing your task to bugs. You guys don't really have to worry about it right now. I mean, you fix bugs in the stuff that you have, but it's not until you spent months as a team fixing bugs together that it's like, that's like kind of like cleaning your house or like cleaning your room. It's super important to do, and you know you need to do it, but it's not the most enjoyable task. It's not necessarily why you got into game development, right? It's just something that you need to do. It raises the overall quality of your game, but it does slow you down because those bugs, you never know how long, as a programmer, a bug fix is going to take. I've spent weeks fixing bugs, like a single bug. There was a bug that I fixed on Hunted where we had a user-generated dungeon maker. You can make dungeons in that game. And the bug was that you'd be playing multiplayer, and if one person ran ahead to the exit before the other person loaded the first level in, you'd sometimes end up in a case where the other person didn't see doors, he didn't see enemies. Basically, the level was empty for them. I was like, crap. Somewhere in Unreal, it was failing. And I spent weeks on that bug. Actually, this was after another programmer spent 3 weeks on that bug, too. He spent 3 weeks on it, said, I don't know what to do, I can't fix it. And he was just like pulling his hair out. So I helped him out. And the bug fix was super simple. The reason why the bug was happening was because in our dungeons, you could place two of the same type of room back to back, and they would have the same name. The name of the level was the same. And so what would happen is that you'd unload one level and start loading in the next one. The problem was, because they had the same name, the way the networking worked, it thought that you were trying to unload that level, so it disconnected all the multiplayer parts of that level out, and they were just gone. So when you loaded that new one and it said, nope, I already unloaded this level, I don't need it. And so you go into that level and there'd be nothing there. And the fix was just to give the levels as they loaded, just put a little number on the end of them as they loaded. It was like 2 lines of code to fix it. And it sucks because that bug, if it went out, would prevent us from shipping that feature, which just blows my mind that you can have such a crazy bug. And sometimes bugs will stress you out too. I feel like as an artist and as a designer, the bugs tend to be a little bit easier. They're more well-known. Lighting bugs, collision bugs. Like this collision doesn't match, or there's random weird collision, or oh, these triggers don't work, or oh, this ability or this spell that I'm casting for like WoW doesn't work in some cases. Oh, well, I know why that is. And then those bugs tend to be really straightforward to fix. But bug fixing is still considered polish. Okay. Oh, Brink. Brink was pretty cool looking, but there is a decision that people have to make. I talked about this already. You will run out of time to make a game, to finish a game, depending on how your scheduling goes, or depending on how hard the features are. Maybe just like 3 or 4 really key people leave the company. That happens. And you'll just start getting behind. So when you get to the end and you're out of time, what are your options? Well, the guys making over at Obsidian who made Alpha Protocol, the game was kind of buggy. It wasn't really very super polished. It wasn't very well balanced, but they could have probably spent another 6 months on it to make it better, but they decided to just go with it. They worked with a publisher to figure out whether it was important to delay the game or whether it was more important to just ship it as is. They decided that in that case it was more important to ship it as is. The same thing happened to Brink. Brink needed more time. It was super unpolished. The game was just not fun in a multiplayer aspect, which is a shame because if they would have spent more time on it, it would have ended up better too. If you think about all the games that have been delayed for a super long time, thinking like, let's not say Diablo 3. Diablo 3 was delayed a long time, but I think that it probably could have been made, if we had to start over again, that game could be made in under 2 years from scratch. But games like World of Warcraft were heavily delayed. StarCraft 2 was pretty delayed. Team Fortress 2, how delayed was that? Along with Half-Life 2 and Half-Life 2 Episode 1. All those games were delayed a super long time, but they were worth it, right? Does anyone remember even how long they were delayed? But how many people remember how good those games are? Half-Life 2 is great. Half-Life 2 Episode 3, when is that coming out? Anyone know? Half-Life 3. How long has it been since Half-Life 2 came out?
Oh, can't count the 3.
They can't count the 3. Half-Life 2 came out in 2005? 2004? Something like that? It's been almost 10 years. It blows my mind. When did Half-Life 1 come out? Anyone know when Half-Life 1 came out? Half-Life 2 still holds up as a great game, which is crazy to me. That it came out so long ago, but it still holds up because it just has so much polish in it. The characters are believable, the gameplay is fun and very straightforward, but also interesting. The physics guns that they have, very cool. And then they used the Half-Life 2 engine for all kinds of things. The engine that they made for Half-Life 2, TF2 is made with it, Portal is made with it. Portal 2, which is like one of the best games ever, was made with it too. So a lot of game studios get to that decision, like Valve did with Half-Life 2, and they're like, well, is this game ready yet? It's not ready. Should we ship it or should we spend more time on it? And depending on which road you take, you might just end up with a game that is not quite at the level that you expected. Anyone know why TF2 was delayed so long?
They had to like restyle it because originally it didn't look good, and then they decided to go all cartoony instead of realistic.
Yeah, but that doesn't make them take 7 years to make the game. The biggest reason is that they want to make the game fun. They spent so long working on this game. They actually had a playable version of the game that looks very close to what we have, except without that stylization that you mentioned, Carlos, super early after Half-Life 1 got released. The mod was released for Team Fortress 1, and they started working on Team Fortress 2. But there are a lot of reasons why other games get delayed. I think I mentioned this before too, in last class at least. I'll reiterate a lot of the reasons why games get delayed. Bugs can sometimes be a big reason why games get delayed. Like I said, you can't estimate accurately how long it's going to take you to fix a bug as a programmer. Optimizations take a lot longer than people think. So reorganizing a level, when you try to cram the level to be as small as you possibly can, and it still isn't fitting, and it's over by a lot, then you're like, shit, well, this level by itself is either not going to make it to the end of the game, or we got to spend like 2 months, rip it apart, and put it back together again so it'll fit in memory. I mentioned TRCs and TCRs. Those things suck. They take a long time to get through. They also suck because you can submit your game, you think you have everything fixed, and it's just like taking a test. You think you have all the right answers, you get the grade back, and you figure out you failed by 2 points. You get to resubmit again. The problem is that there's a queue. Your game, when you submit it, doesn't get evaluated right away. No, there's like all these other games, and they say it's a 2 to 6 week window from the time that you submit your game before they get back to you. So they can take a month and a half where you're basically doing who knows what, hopefully fixing bugs, before you find out if even the game that you sent them is viable or not. And if then you fail, I think you can fail 3 times. If you submit 3 times, it might even be a 3rd time, I don't remember. A 3rd time you have to pay a fine for every time that you want to submit after that. It's like $10,000 for every time you submit a game. The first 2 certification passes are free, at least for Microsoft they are. So those take time. Localization too. I didn't even think about how long localization would take. So localization is the process of making your game that you made here in the United States playable around the world, which means either replacing all the text, also sometimes means replacing all the VO. Sometimes you do a partial replacement of VO. You only replace for the EFIGS language, which is English, French, Italian, German, Spanish, because those are like the main countries that are very popular for games. So sometimes you'll just record VO for those, and then localize the text for like Japan and Sweden and Korea and China. So you won't do VO for that. Blizzard has our own localization team, so we localize for everything, VO and everything total. But other things you need to localize for are just the region. China is heavily censored in their games. You guys hear that they finally are going to allow Xbox One to be sold in their country for the first time. They've never had a console in their country, or they haven't had a console in their country for 14 years. No game console has been legally sold in China. You can buy all kinds of bootleg consoles in China, but for the first time ever, you can sell an Xbox One in China. The problem is that all the games you want to sell have to go through their certification bureau, which means that anything that they deem too offensive or not censored enough doesn't make it to the shelves in China. So like games that you think are really cool here that you would want to play in China may not even ever make it. So you'll have to go through a bootleg market. And that effort, like for WoW, so many problems with WoW, like censors their skeletons, their undead class in that game. Did you know that in China, like they don't show bones for their undead classes? There's like a different model pack.
I think the Forsaken look way better in the Chinese version.
Really, because they're not so bony, like their legs and stuff?
It always seemed weird to me that, which I don't like that they're continuing the exact same look on the new model, that it just breaks. Like in porcelain, which I get was originally because of limitations in poly count and stuff like that. But to continue with the new higher res model seems odd to me. And then that my robe cuts there too, but I still have the cuff of the robe.
Yeah.
This is really strange.
Yeah. It's wild. You know, that's the best thing about being such a stylized game, is that it looks weird, but it doesn't look as bad as if you were to make a game like Brink, like super realistic. You couldn't make an undead class like that.
You can get away with a lot with stylization.
Yeah, you kind of fill in the blanks, and you stop noticing it after a while too, because like it's not as important as the gameplay.
And it holds up a lot better. Like go back and play a stylized Super Nintendo game like Donkey Kong or something. It looks great. Already now I play Skyrim and I'm like, man, the graphics on this are aging.
Yeah. Did you guys know that? I guess Blizzard released 3 original games. A guy on Battle.net who I used to work with, Stephen Robb, he spent a bunch of his own personal time to port Lost Vikings, Blackthorn, Rock and Roll Racing. I don't remember what else. It was other games too. You can just go log into Battle.net and you'll have those games. You can just download them. Yeah, you can play them, which is cool, for free. But localization for China, they have to spend artist time on that. It also costs a lot of programmer time because China is the one special snowflake that they get a special model pack for their undead models that is not the same anywhere else. And it's worse because if you play World of Warcraft here and you change your language to be Chinese, you won't have that censored version of the undead model. If you go to China and you play World of Warcraft, 1, you can't pick English as a language to switch to. 2, when you play a Chinese version, you get the censored version. So all that special casing costs us so much time and money. So localization is a pain. Plus censorship in Germany is, it used to be a lot more strict than it is now. You can make games with blood in them and everything. You usually have to have a censored tag on them. They still will censor some things, like you can't, I mentioned you can't immolate people in your game. You can't hurt or injure or kill captive humans in your game. So someone that's tied up or in a jail cell, you can't kill them in your game. So we used to have prisoners in our game. They were tied up, and you could either free them, and they would give you story, and they would give you achievements and points, or you could kill them, which would also give you story and points, but in a different branch. At the end of the game, it would like give you different kind of items based on how many prisoners you killed or saved, which is like Brian Fargo's thing. Like that was his thing in like Wasteland and all his games that he made over at Interplay, and he wanted to have that, but we had to cut it. You couldn't kill prisoners anymore because we wanted to ship in Germany, and we didn't have time to make a special German model, German version of the game. So we just cut it for all of our languages. Crazy. It's not always clear why delays happen. In fact, I feel like if the guys working on Diablo 3, I know guys that have been working on Diablo 3 since after Diablo 2 came out. Right after Diablo 2 Lord of Destruction shipped, they immediately started working on Diablo 3. I know guys that have been working on it since then. That's like 10 years on the same product. He's been through, this guy Jason Regier, he's the lead programmer. He's actually, I think, the technical director now. He worked on it for 10 years before the game shipped, and he was through 2 reboots before it actually ended up being the game that it was. And do you feel like anyone on the team actually wanted to go through that process of spending 10 years on a single game? Can you imagine working? That's his only credit in 10 years at Blizzard. He started at Blizzard North, right after Diablo 2 Lord of Destruction finished. He started there, wanting to ship Diablo 3 because he liked Diablo 2 so much. 10 years, and now he has a single credit to his name. Sucks. But, you know, that's the problem, is that the reason why this game had to get rebooted so often is because it's kind of the same reason that my team's game got rebooted too. You get to the point where you're playing your game and you felt like you were making all the right decisions, but it's kind of like, I don't know what a good metaphor is here. It's kind of like you buy a car and you did all your research on buying that car and you're like, oh, this is awesome. I'm so excited to finally drive my car. I did all my reviews, I sat in it, I test drove it, and it's amazing. And then you buy it and you take it home and you drive around for a couple weeks and stuff starts falling apart and the car doesn't handle as nicely as you thought it did, and you get into an accident or two and just kind of starts like not being the car that you thought it was. Ends up that you start feeling like, wow, maybe I made the wrong decision. But you didn't know. You thought you were making all the right decisions. And the problem is you didn't know that until after you had already committed to it. And the problem is you have to commit to making a game. You have to believe that the game you're making is actually going to be the best game that you ever made. But Diablo 3 ended up being in a situation where they made the game twice, and at the end of each of those cycles they said, well, this game is kind of fun, but it's not quite there. It's missing some key features. Like originally it was built on top of the same engine as Diablo 2, and it was going to ship on that same engine with a little bit of an upgrade visually. And they're like, no, this isn't going to work. And so then they upgraded to the 3D engine. And then when they were making that, they were like, man, they kind of built this engine from scratch, and the tools weren't really functioning well. The game itself was kind of fun, but there are problems with the engine that they're using. And they're like, well, this sucks. We want to actually ship eventually on consoles, and we want to make this game actually really fun on PC. For us, it was an issue of trying to make a game that we didn't believe in. We didn't understand what kind of game that we needed to make. So I think that sometimes when you restart a game, it ultimately ends up being better. hopefully it ends up being better. I'm trying to think of a case where people restarted a game and it actually ended up being worse. I don't think they would publicize that kind of thing. Have there been any games that have actually been restarted and then failed? There was one that was announced recently by guys who worked on EVE Online, the vampire game based on Vampire Bloodlines. It was an MMO. It was in development for like 8 years. It was just announced on Kotaku. Black something. Anyway, there was a game that was in development, an MMO, and they ended up canceling it after 8 years of development, which really sucks for that team.
Did StarCraft 2 get rebooted at all, or did they just wait to start on it a while?
Yes, every single Blizzard game to this point has been rebooted except for Hearthstone, at least once. So and Heart of the Swarm. Like expansions haven't been rebooted, only the initial launches, like StarCraft 2 did, Warcraft 3 did, Diablo 3 did, World of Warcraft, Project Titan. What else was there? I think that covered all the major bases. Yeah, StarCraft 2 was a long time in the making, but I think they ended up with the right thing too. Like StarCraft 2 is still king of the RTS genre. I don't think there's any other RTS out there that competes on that level of StarCraft 2. I don't see any other competitive RTS games, unfortunately. So I kind of want to end the presentation on the last bit. This is the new Capcom game, Deep Down. It's a PS4 game. If you've seen the trailers, it kind of looks like Dark Souls. The premise behind the game is that you're actually a collector of ancient artifacts in the future, and you can dive into the past of an artifact, and you can travel back in time virtually, and that's what the game takes place in. You're fighting dragons and stuff. It's kind of cool. So I think that you've all played games that are felt polished. I bring up Halo as a great example of a game that is well polished. There are many elements to Halo, many gameplay features of Halo, and each one of them is really well done. Multiplayer is super well done in Halo. The campaign is excellent. Its multiplayer cooperative campaign is also really good. The weapons feel good, the gameplay is balanced, doesn't feel too hard, doesn't feel too easy. There's a lot of end-game content to Halo as well. Other games that feel polished, StarCraft 2, right? Balanced, it's challenging, it looks great, but what about a game that doesn't have as much polish? What are some games that you played recently that don't actually have this? You can't count my game that I entered for Ludum Dare. I only spent 8 hours on. What are some games you guys played recently? Like Titanfall is a great example of another game that has awesome polish. What are some games you guys played recently? Stick of Truth is probably, I feel like, is pretty polished actually. It's really well laid out. What are some bad games you played lately? You guys don't play bad games anymore. You refuse to. There used to be a time when you didn't know whether a game was good or not until you actually started playing it. No bad games lately? Castlevania 2? What's that?
No more gambling.
No more gambling? Castlevania 2? Really? It's not good? I watched some people play it.
Shadow 2.
Yeah.
It's like actual gameplay is fine, but there are some things that like pop out to me that are just really ugly looking.
Oh, you mean in the environment and the animations and the effects and stuff?
During the opening cutscene, there's a particle effect that just looks really bad. And there's a bunch of other stuff that you notice throughout the game.
Little things like that ruin it.
I pick apart art. There are tons of games, but
Yeah, we can pick apart art. What's an example of a game that you played recently?
I don't like the art in the new Yoshi's Island. They
I haven't
tried
played
to
that.
blend 3D with like the original 2D kind of like
The cartoony stylized version?
Yeah, they tried to blend it, and it just looks really bad, I think.
Okay. Here's a game that I saw recently, Guns 2. Have you guys seen Guns 2 trailer? No?
A reboot of Gun.
But it's like an enhancement. It's like a remake in HD with co-op in it. Guns originally was an online free-to-play, third-person shoot-'em-up action adventure slash game. It had like PvP. It's made by a Korean company. It had wall jumping, double jumping, swords, guns, dueling,
Don't forget
flying, wall running, wall shooting, all this stuff that all was super buggy. Like the game was so buggy that you actually depended on those bugs to be competitive because other people were also using that bug. Just like in Quake, in the original Quake 3 had the bug where you could strafe jump. You guys ever watched competitive Quake 3? There's a bug in Quake 3 code where if you turn and you jump and as you land you also continue to strafe, your strafe velocity starts accumulating faster than you can actually run, so you can end up zooming around the level way faster than you normally should be able to. Rocket jumping is another example of a bug, right? Buggy game, but ends up being part of the gameplay, just like in Guns. What is another game that I saw that seemed really bad? I'm bringing up Guns because like they just don't have any clue of what like polished gameplay. Their philosophy is just let's just get people to play PvP and put them in a co-op environment and it'll be fun. It was fine, and it works to an extent, but I'm not interested in it. We'll see. We'll see if it actually amounts to something. Other things that don't have polish. I'm trying to think here. Games that I've been playing. Oh, Elder Scrolls Online. Anyone playing that? What do you think about it, Kyle?
Okay, could use some work.
Could use some work,
It's
right?
somewhere stuck. It's, I don't know. It feels like it doesn't know it wants to be an Elder Scrolls game or an MMO.
Right.
It's like stuck somewhere in between where it doesn't really satisfy either thing for me.
Yeah, that's a fundamental problem, and it's not even about polish. I think in that game, as much as it is about the actual design of the game itself not matching up. But I think that keep this in mind when you're working on your games because polish can make a good game great, but you can't make a bad game good by polishing it. That's the problem. I have a lecture next week I'm going to go over about how to some common flaws and problems with polishing games that you run into. Like if you take a bad game and you think that adding sound effects and music and art and making pretty graphics and adding multiplayer will fix the fundamental problems, it won't. If you take a good game and don't do anything to it, don't polish it, it'll still be fun by itself. And so if you take that good game that was fun by itself and then polish it, that's when you actually get a great game. You can't make a great game by polishing a turd. So you have to start with something good before you can actually end up with something great. So when you guys are working on your game, if you feel like you're polishing it and it's still not, it's just not getting better, then maybe there's something wrong with the fundamental design of it. All right, any questions on polishing? Some of my favorite parts, I'll talk about some of my favorite parts about polishing. I really enjoy like fixing small issues that are hard to see. Like animations are a great avenue, place that you can polish. You can spend a lot of time. Hitching, like blends between animation that look wrong, fixing those adds a lot. Talking with effects guys, getting something more like you have placeholder effects, replacing those always makes a big difference. Camera shake is also a big thing. Like camera shake adds a lot. So little things like controller shake too. Those are usually some of the last things to go in, but controller shake can add a lot to your game and make it more immersive and feel more polished too. What other things do I like to do for polish specifically? Other things that are kind of polish items, it's important to consider places that it would make sense to put like cinematic moments. Like in Hunted we had cases where like you could do these assassinations, and so some of the things you can do are kind of push the limit of what you normally think for assassinations. Like we had some really, we had the animators mark up all the cameras as well to be animated. So it's not just the characters animating, but the camera, God of War does this all the time. Like if you play God of War, any God of War in the last 10 years, it's been 10 years, like 8 years, any God of War, and anytime you're interacting with bosses and stuff, then they not only animate the two characters, but the camera itself is also part of that animation. And adding that to your game can add a lot, especially in cases of animations and helping you feel more immersed in it. Cool. Okay. No questions? All right, so I want to spend the next like 15 minutes going over something in Unity. I want to show you guys how to set up camera shakes in Unity using Playmaker, and also a little bit more on particles and getting some more juicy, interesting looking particles and effects.